Hey everyone, welcome back to our study of the epistle of First Peter on exhortation. And we are still in the larger pericope of exhortations based on social groups. First Peter chapter 2:11 through 3:12. And this is a quick overview of what we've looked at: condition and behavior, the relationship to government, masters, non-Christian husbands, and to wives. And today we'll be looking at the relationship to the Christian family of God. And then as we continue onward, we're going to look at the next larger pericope that has a theme of suffering and the guidelines for suffering. So, part 11, relationship to Christian family of God. 1 Peter chapter 3, 8 through 12. And before you read, take a look at the short outline of what we will be looking at. The verse 8 is harmony in the church. Verse 9 is Christian response to opposition. Verses 10 and 11 is the reiteration of importance of harmony. And verse 12, the omniscience and omnipresence of God. All right, so with that in mind, go ahead and read these verses and familiarize yourself with them. So, harmony in the church, chapter 3, verse 8. Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate, and humble. That is a lot to take in. Just one verse, so many things that Peter's getting at here. So first off, we're going to start with what harmony is, of one mind or being concordant. And that has been displayed very, very well throughout the first century church. And it's something that we can definitely work towards and reflect as the church in the 21st century. In Acts chapter 4:32, it says, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. Think about how society would be if we just said, you know what? I know this is something that I purchased from the store. This is not my meal that I'm preparing for my family, but it's actually not mine. It belongs to everybody. So, we always in our house have an issue with leftovers. It's always like we don't always want to eat the leftovers. We want a fresh meal. But just think, instead of leftovers, invite somebody over and, hey, this isn't just mine. This also belongs to you. So I want you to also partake in that. And think of anything and everything that belongs to us, what it could be used for if we keep the mentality that it's not just mine, it's other people's as well. Romans 12:16 says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. And it sounds very, very similar to what Peter has here in verse 8. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. A lot of the Christian conduct among others people, for some reason, it gets so hard within the church to do exactly that. But the Bible is very, very clear that we have to make the effort even more so for to maintain that Christian conduct with other Christians, because we're not perfect. I mean, if the church was perfect, there'd be a lot of empty churches out there. So live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. And I think that has been a huge issue with the church, whereas, I'm a Christian, so I'm better than that person that's selling themselves on the street corner, or the drug addict, or, fill in the blank. But be willing to associate with people of low position. If we consider somebody else in a low position, instead of just leaving it at that, and not associating with them, that is very prideful and arrogant to do that. Because guess what? We only have salvation for one reason. The only reason why we can consider ourselves a Christian and have a relationship with God has nothing to do with anything that we do. It is conceited and very prideful to not extend that towards other people, because our relationship is only a realization because of what God has done through his son, Jesus Christ. So we cannot be conceited in those terms. Romans 15:5 reiterates, Paul reiterates that as well, and includes what that activity, the activity of God within that. 1 Corinthians 1:10, I appeal to you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another, so that there may be no divisions among you, and that you may be perfectly united in mind and thought. Now, this is one of those verses that is often used for self-gain and self-advantage. For example, church leadership can say, you know what, we have this vision, this is what we think God wants us to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And somebody comes in and say, hey, I like this idea. Let's be a part of that. And it's kind of like, well, you're not doing it the way that we want you to do it, though. That is not what like-mindedness is at all. By submitting, or like if the master says to the dog, sit down, and the dog sits, that's the same mentality that church leadership in some areas continue to run their congregations and their churches. But the reality is, when we have a like-mindedness, it has to do with the end result, the end goal. And what is that? How are we spreading the gospel? Are we able to spread the gospel because of the way that we interact with each other? And if that's not doable, then perhaps we need to stop interacting with each other like the way that we are. For example, the apostles, when they were released from prison in Acts, they noted, hey, those people were with Jesus. All right, the way that they interacted with each other had a significance to them that pointed people right to who Christ was. And that is the like-mindedness that Peter's pointing towards. How our Christian conduct among each other, what does that really look like? Does it look like it's pointing to Christ, or is it pointing towards what we think Christ should be, or how we think that Christ should be communicated? Philippians 2:2 and 4:2, Paul writes, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. And I plead, in 4:2, I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. We can argue day and night about how certain ministry should be done and all of that, but what it comes down to is, how are we communicating Christ? And if that is not our main goal, then what is it for real? That's why it's so, the New Testament is so filled with different examples of how the Spirit of God has empowered people to do crazy, amazing things. And today in the 21st century, we wonder, where is all that kind of thing? Well, it's not happening because we're too busy arguing with each other and saying that, well, this is how it should be. This is how it has to be. This is how we want to do ministry. But really, what it comes down to is the gospel being spread to other people. Harmony develops sympathy. All right? Harmony among other people, even though you may not get along with each other, as long as you have that same goal, that harmony, it does develop sympathy. And once that sympathy starts to develop, there are more ways to communicate the gospel with other people. Forgiveness is such a huge, huge thing that it could impact people that are not even involved. When they observe, like, wow, that must have really hurt them, but they still forgave them. What's up with that? Okay. Continuing on, be sympathetic, compassion and understanding, literally suffering and feeling the same. When we can build rapport with people by being empathetic and sympathetic as well, but mostly empathy. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. And this is also one of those other verses that we point to that and say, like, I don't see that in the church. Well, you are also the church. Okay. What this verse in Romans is pointing towards is not like, hey, I have something to rejoice with. Why isn't anybody else rejoicing with me? It's actually the other way around. Even if you don't have something to rejoice over, you still should see other people who are rejoicing and join with them in that, despite feeling, you know what, I'm really not feeling up for the task. But that's not what this verse is saying. It's saying you need to rejoice with others who rejoice. And on the flip side, to mourn with those who mourn. A lot of it is always like, oh, woe is me. Like, I need somebody to give me the attention. I want somebody to love on me. And it's actually the other way around. We may not feel like we need to mourn. We're probably at our high, but we run into somebody that we should be loving on because they need that love, not because we want someone to rejoice with us or we want somebody to mourn with us. Even if that's true, you need to rejoice or you need to mourn. Sometimes you need to put those on hold so you, as the Christian, can turn around and say, I need to rejoice with you, or I need to mourn with you. 1 Corinthians 12:26 reads, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And it's so similar to what Paul writes in Romans 12:15. But the part I want to point out here is that if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And I think when it comes to church harmony, when we start seeing somebody doing really, really good at something and we downplay it or depreciate it, then you're doing a disservice to the gospel. Okay, the gospel and Christ has equipped us with certain things. And if it comes out spectacular, that is not a sign of somebody being prideful. That is a sign of God doing wonderful things in other people's lives. So if somebody does something that's honorable, you need to rejoice with them. I've witnessed so many people do things where I thought, wow, they look so scared, but they did it anyway. And I think that is something we should be giving honor to people. Hebrews 4:15 and 10:39, that reads, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. And Hebrews 10:39, but we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. So to reiterate, if we're going to mourn, we should, if we see somebody that is mourning, we need to mourn with them. If they are rejoicing, to rejoice with them. If they do something that deserve honor, we need to give them honor, because Christ, that is the example that he gave us. And here in Hebrews, we don't have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. Okay, meaning that he can. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Christ is able to empathize with us. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. Going back to, doing something that is great, that is honorable. All right, we should not be people that shrink back. We should be doing things that are amazing. All right, I don't know about you guys, but I'm really tired of the world looking at the church thinking that we're a bunch of pansies. I really am. I think that when it comes to writing music, doing art, running a business, everything, it should be consistent with what it says in Scripture. And Scripture says we should not do things to try to look humble, but we should do things at our best and our capacity of doing so, and all by the power of the Spirit as well. 1 Thessalonians, love as brothers, phileo love, to a fellow countryman, or like a Christian to Christian. And 1 Thessalonians 4:9 says, Now, about brotherly love, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. How amazing is that the Thessalonians knew exactly what brotherly love was, to the point that Paul was like, hey, you guys got this. You're doing great with it. And the reason for that isn't just because, hey, yeah, we get along, we have harmony or anything like that. It had to do with they were taught by God to love each other. Sometimes it takes exactly that. I know there's so many people out there that, hey, when you get together, you flow. You're like the cogs are working perfectly. But when it comes to that person that you know your best way to love them is from a distance, you need to have the Spirit of God to empower you and to humble you, to give them that love, to be that servant towards them, that servant that Peter has been exhorting the believers to live through and live in. What does this brotherly love look like? Compassionate, having strong bowels, or compassionate, tender-hearted. I love how that word can be used, as having strong bowels. Sometimes we can recognize love by receiving hard words from somebody, like somebody calling you out, and it might be a strike to the gut. And being that person that does that is scary. It's so nerve-wracking, because that means there's a great possibility that you lose a friend. But if you are compassionate, if you have that compassion, you can take that blow and recognize that what's being said and what's being done is out of love. Ephesians 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you. All right, having a strong bowels, being able to take that blow, is meaning you recognize the fact that you need to ask for forgiveness. So to continue that example, you're called out. Oh, like, I didn't know that. I'm like genuinely sorry. Not like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. But, having the strong bowels means enduring it and not just brushing it off. All right. And humble, friendly, or kind. Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. How amazing would churches be in the Western culture if everybody thought that everybody else was better than them? Now, that's not to say to like degrade yourself. We shouldn't be doing that at all. But we should definitely know our place under God. And when we humble ourselves and consider others better than ourselves, that entails many things. What if everybody else turned around and said, you're able to do something that I can't. I need you. How do you respond to that? With humility, and say, yeah, I'm here for you, and do that. And vice versa. When you can say, somebody's better than me at this, I need their help. Okay. For example, I'm not handy with tools, and my dad would probably scold me for this. Actually, he does. So I don't know why I said it that way, but there's certain things, yeah, I can do, but there are a lot of things when it comes to tools and like holes in the wall that need repaired or something like that I just don't know how to do it. So I call for help. I call others for help. And I can't tell you how many times that my dad or somebody else has come to me and showed me how to do these things. And, sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. But I know that there are certain people I can go to because I know they're better at certain things than I am. And that's what that humility is, that friendly and kind humbleness. All right, so Christian response to opposition, chapter 3, verse 9. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. All right, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing. Okay, passive like grace and mercy, not aggressive retaliation, vindication, or ignorance. Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 48 is Jesus' teaching on the Mount, which offers a great illustration to what Peter's saying here. And I don't want to read the entire verse, but I want to point out one key phrase that Jesus uses over and over again. You have heard that it was said, all right, but I tell you. And then that's verse 38 and 39. And then 40, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks, and do not turn away from the enemy who wants to borrow from you. All right, and then verse 43, you have heard that it was said. And then verse 44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus uses those 2 lines over and over and over and over again. So, for example, an eye for an eye. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, these verses are so hard to interpret, and I've heard so many different ways that it's been presented, and the continuing verses afterwards. But when somebody insults you and you know what, just turn the other cheek. Like, what does that mean? Like, show them your back and cheeks or something, or I've heard it said, like, actually offer them the other one so they can hit that one too. Like, ouch. Like, why would we want to put ourselves in that kind of position? So I'm wondering, what exactly is Jesus getting at? And in the context that he's saying that, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, all right, that teaching was in the Old Testament where Moses wrote down that if something was going to happen, you cannot let it go. Like, there needs to be some recompense and repentance and repayment of whatever's going on. So the example is, all right, this cow, it got stuck in your well or something, and it died. So we need repayment for that. So it costs 100, but we're only going to give you 50 because it was older. Or no, I don't want 50. It costs 100, but because of what happened, I want 150. I want 200. What Moses had to say was, hold on, okay? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, okay? If it's 100, then you pay 100. If it's 50, then you pay 50. That's exactly what Moses was getting at. But it went too far with how it was taught and how the people received it. So Jesus comes along and says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Jesus actually was saying, offer them the other cheek to have them slap you. Like, really? Why though? And that's a question to struggle with and wrestle with. Why would Jesus want you to do that? Because if somebody's trying to take advantage of you, if they want to take more than just an eye or more than just a tooth, if they want to lord over you just so they can look like they're better, Jesus says, go ahead, let them do that. Looking at it into eternal eyes, though, what kind of power do they really have over us when God is over us and when God is over them as well? All right, verse 40 says, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. All right. So, for example, Roman centurion comes up to you and says, hey, give me your cloak. Like, you're just another Jew. Like, you give me that because I have the authority over you. Jesus says, oh, you want my coat? Here, take my shirt too. Do you need anything else? And that just says, hey, I'm not going to let you have power over me because God is over me. He has my best interest of what's going on. He's the one that's going to provide for me. No matter what hardship comes, I know that God still loves me. All right. So verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, Go with them 2 miles. So this same Roman centurion says, hey, carry my pack. My horse needs to rest. Go with them instead of 1 mile. Go even further. Just so you can, not just bragging rights or anything like that, but say, yeah, okay, if your top of the line steed needs a rest, I will carry it. And you know what? Let's give him an extra rest because he may look like he needs it. That is just a slap in the face of pride, isn't it? When somebody tries to lord over you, but you go above and beyond and you do your best just so you can show that God is the one that's actually in control. All right. Give to one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you, because God, he's in this. Whether you get anything back, do you really need it? Whether you get it back or not, God still loves you, and God is on your side and is for you. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing. So why? Because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. And what is this blessing? I've kind of already hit on that, but we're heirs with God. We are his child. We are his friend, his brother, however you want to look at it. So what is this blessing? It is this salvation, or is it this life? And I'd like to argue that it's actually both. All right. Once we have our salvation, we experience life for eternity. And that is awesome. That is so great. All right. So coming to verses 10 and 11, reiteration of importance of harmony. Verse 10, for whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. All right, so this harmony thing within the church and responding to the persecution that's going around, how do we interact with each other? And Peter reiterates with these verses, which reiterate verses 8 and 9. Here's the expression of God's blessing to us, going further than salvation. We should live holy, righteous lives, blessed or not blessed. Pointing back to chapter 2, verse 12, which is, once again, the thesis of the entire letter. God gives and he takes away. For example, Job. Okay, whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. Job was one that did that, but he still went through suffering. And there's so many things about the life of Job that is so intriguing to dive into. For example, he loses everything. He even loses his children. But at the end of the story, everything is doubled except for the children, which is like, well, why not? Because of the eternal outlook on it all. These children were still alive in God, so they actually were doubled. The children were living in the presence of God while he had more children, the doubled amount here on earth. And I think that is something that, yeah, God gives and he takes away, but when he takes something, it's something for it's something for an eternal value. Yet blessing always is life to love. All right. If you're alive, love, do it. Whatever it takes, endure through it and love other people. All right. In verse 12, omniscience and omnipresence of God. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So the omniscience of God, the attribute of God that is all-knowing and all-seeing, and the omnipresence of God, which is present everywhere at all times. This is not mainly about God being ready to punish a Christian who does wrong. This is unrighteous, and even then, we would bring punishment to ourselves because of the outcome of the unrighteous deeds. All right, God's not always willing to just like, yeah, I'm going to throw the hammer down, because honestly, when we do sin, when we do something out of unrighteousness, that in and of itself is the punishment. That is what we bring on ourselves, why would God add to that? All right. That's not to say that God doesn't use those to bring us back to Him. When that punishment or that guilt sets in, it's like, where do we go? Where do we run? We need to run to God with those things. And what God awaits and watches for is who to bless because of their faith being lived out in holy righteousness. All right, so God sees everything. Yes, He sees our wrong, but He also sees our right. That He's eager to point out, like, it's not going to shock Him that you do wrong. It's not going to shock Him when you do right. But He longs for us to seek out His righteousness and exercise that. Now, this righteousness, that has nothing to do with what we're capable of making ourselves. It all has to do with how God is making us. So yes, His eyes are on us, and it is to work in us and through us towards a righteous living. Because after all, that is the conduct of the believer, is to live in righteousness and in holiness by His Spirit. All right, so let's finish up this part with the questions for reflections. Peter differentiates between living within the church and associating with outside of the church. Where do we draw the line between being in the world and not part of it? We can pray, evangelize, etc., but not be part of it. How? Does Peter have a difference between relations and acquaintances? If so, where is there a problem with this approach? How do we relate and build rapport? All right. And thank you for joining me in this video, and we'll be seeing you guys later. God bless.